Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. Today is Friday, May 17th, and today we have a packed show. We're going to be going all across the country in terms of the different sports and headlines. We're going to be starting off in Minnesota, where we saw the Timberwolves absolutely dominate the Denver Nuggets to force a Game 7. We're going to be touching on that. Then we are going to be doing some NHL playoffs, just sort of briefly moving across all of the different series. And we saw the New York Rangers be the first team to clinch a spot in the conference finals, so we're going to be touching on that as well. Then we are going to be talking some NFL, talking about some different exercises where I want to go through the biggest concerns with each of the Super Bowl contenders and also sort of project out a little bit. We had the schedule release take place on Wednesday night, and I want to look ahead and sort of see where we think that some of these rookie quarterbacks could end up making their first career starts. And then finally, in the final segment, I want to talk some MLB updates where we have some various storylines that I want to dive into there. Talking about Elly De La Cruz as he continues to shine with the Cincinnati young core. Ronel Blanco was suspended after finding a foreign substance in his glove, and talk a little bit about the Astros in general as well as they continue to struggle. And we have another Tommy John surgery taking place, this time with the Dodgers once again. So want to dive into all of that. So again, packed show today. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts, and if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, if you'd like to become a bigger part of the show, have your comments pop up on screen. You can use the comment or the link that is streaming across the bottom section. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Starting off today, we are going to be, as I mentioned, talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves, who just absolutely took it to the Denver Nuggets last night in their Game 6 matchup, and now we have a Game 7 on our hands, as this series has been very much unpredictable, very back and forth, and this time it is the Nuggets falling in one of these blowout games, and it was really interesting to see the adjustments from the Timberwolves from Game 5 to 6. Now, I don't think that they did, at their core, anything extremely different, but there were some subtle differences from the past couple games, the biggest of which was the defense on Nikola Jokic, where we saw Jokic go absolutely berserk in Game 5, dropping 40 points, dishing out 13 assists, not turning the ball over once, and in this instance, it in large part had to do with the fact that in that game, the Timberwolves were maybe they were confident, maybe they weren't, but either way, they decided to roll Rudy Gobert out there, in part because Karl Anthony Towns was once again dealing with foul trouble in that Game 5, but Cat was much more disciplined, and he was the primary defender in this game to cover Jokic, which I think is the better option for this Timberwolves defense as a whole. Rudy Gobert can be the help defender. He matches up against Aaron Gordon, who has had some good three-point shooting games in this series, especially in the 3 consecutive games that the Nuggets won. He also hit a couple in that Game 2 matchup as well that the Timberwolves ended up running away with. But sort of having him be able to roam the paint a little bit more and deter other players from getting involved, I think that is the way that the Timberwolves have to operate. Obviously, it seems like on paper, Rudy Gobert would be the best possible defender to put against the Nikola Jokic, the MVP versus the Defensive Player of the Year. But in actuality, it sort of removes Gobert from being able to alter any other types of shots because he has to be so fixated on Jokic. And Jokic was also, again, it's not that Gobert was out of position, I thought, in a lot of those instances, but Jokic was just hitting tough shot after tough shot, and ultimately it was just a blowout game the other way where Jokic was unstoppable. And one of the big differences, of course, was the fact that the rest of the team didn't necessarily come to play the same way, at least from the three-point shooting perspective, where they were abysmal from the line. The Nuggets were 7 of 36 from the three-point line. That is very rarely going to cut it in a 2024 playoff matchup in the NBA. And as a result, the Nuggets scored just 70 points. So again, credit to Karl-Anthony Towns for being able to stick in there, and Rudy Gobert for being able to disrupt these other shots at the rim for the Timberwolves defense to sort of fly around like they were early in this series. Jaden McDaniels, I thought, was incredible in this game as well from a defensive perspective, just flying around to alter plays. But I think that at the same time, you do have to sort of point to this Nuggets team that hasn't necessarily, been tremendous, the supporting cast that is, over the course of this series. And Jamal Murray had another sort of stinker of a game where he was 4 of 18 from the field. He was 2 of 7 from 3, and just seems like he is really struggling right now. Now, how much of that has to do with the calf strain that he was dealing with in the first round against the Lakers? Guess we won't really know until the Nuggets are eliminated and we probably get a little bit more information about it. But Murray struggled once again in this matchup. Michael Porter Jr. is becoming a real concern as well after I praised him because of the fact that he was putting up 22, 23 points per game in the first series as a third option against the Lakers, and he was tremendous. But since then, he has really dipped off in play, and I have talked about it in both of the past two games, the fact that Christian Brown, Mike Malone is choosing to close these games out with him instead of Michael Porter Jr. because MPJ isn't necessarily giving much on the defensive side of the ball anyways, and they just feel like Christian Brown can at least provide a little bit more defense to help guard Anthony Edwards. Now, Brown wasn't great in this game either. Nobody was, really, for the Nuggets in general. And then on the other side, a couple things. One is the return of Mike Conley, who I have been talking about. I think he is far more impactful to this young sort of collection of offensive talents. And again, offensive talents, Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert, for as good of defensive players they are, very limited on the offensive side of the ball. And Mike Conley just helps guide everything for this Timberwolves team. And he was dealing with an Achilles injury in Game 5, and he looked pretty good, at least from my eye test. Now, he didn't have to be pushed maybe all too much, but he looked really good in this game, played 31 minutes. And then, of course, the real thing was Anthony Edwards returning to form. He had struggled in that Game 5 matchup, held to 33% from the field. I believe he scored just 15 points, but in this game, he really got cooking in the first quarter. When Anthony Edwards is hitting step-back threes, it just feels like his game is limitless because of the fact we know how good he is at getting downhill. And, again, when the difficult shots start to fall for Anthony Edwards, it seems like he can do just about anything. There was a little bit of a scary moment it was the third quarter, I believe. It could have been the fourth, but at this point, Timberwolves are up by 20, 25 points, and Anthony Edwards took a hard fall. He jumped up in the air and landed, it looked like, right on his tailbone, and he was really slow to get up. They cut away to commercial break, and he popped right back up and was able to keep going. So, that's being a 22-year-old and having that type of energy, but it did look scary there for a minute. And I assume that he is probably going to be fine in the long term here. But, I think that ultimately with this series, again, we've seen the energy shift every which way so far. And I thought that it was definitely a positive sign for the Timberwolves, and you have to feel great about last night. But I do not expect this type of a performance from Denver when it comes to Game 7. You saw the clips, possibly, if you were in tune with the game. Jokic standing up on the bench the entire fourth quarter. The look on his face, he looked like a villain, sort of plotting his revenge. And I think that he is going to, be the full version of himself in Game 7, but he's going to need help from the rest of his team. And I think that it is very possible that we're sort of at a point with this Nuggets team, as we've talked about this in the past, that seems like from a front office perspective, they weren't 100% focused on repeating as champions. They want to become a dynasty. And some of these young pieces that they have added while letting go the likes of a Jeff Green and a Bruce Brown, who they just didn't have the money to pay. But at this point, they need their starters to be extremely effective. And that's not any sort of a hot take or anything. But Jamal Murray, they are very reliant on him. And I don't know what it is with him. Again, it could possibly be the injury, but we also saw just in Game 2 the way that mentally he was taken out of that game by the hard defense that Minnesota was playing. And now they're going to be back home. They're going to have the home court advantage, of course, and I think that some of these other role players should be able to step up a little bit more in those instances. That's where you see maybe a Christian Brown be able to take on a bigger role. But again, Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. have really struggled for the Nuggets so far in this series for the most part, and it's been Aaron Gordon putting together good performances from them. But you also saw the fact that the Timberwolves were sort of willing to focus more attention on Jokic, where as much as their strategy in the previous game, in Game 5, was to say, okay, we're going to play Jokic straight up, and we are not going to let him get the playmaking going, where didn't seem like they were quite as scared of some of these role players in this latest matchup. They were sort of doubling from the top and good rotations on the back end. If you're going to double down from the three-point line, don't want to give up the easy corner threes. So that was clearly a strategy. Again, like I mentioned with the Karl Anthony Towns primary matchup, they were actually, staying put, specifically in these matchups where Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic are trying to run some two-man action with one another. They're going under everything. If Jokic wants to shoot the three, it seems like they are okay with that, and they would rather have the defense set up in the post in order to take away, because Jokic hasn't been great necessarily from three in this series either. So, I think that they do definitely have some sort of a blueprint for the Nuggets, and they have the personnel defensively to be able to match up. But again, all of that changes because if Jamal Murray is feeling himself, if Michael Porter Jr. gets going, it makes it a lot harder to fixate all your attention on Jokic. So I really think it's going to come down to the other, again, it's not even necessarily like bench players or anything like that. You expect Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. to be able to show up for you offensively, but it has not been that case up to this point. So let me know what your thoughts are. I'm still going to lean with the Nuggets. That was my pick coming into the series, and at this point it seems like somebody may get blown out in Game 7. Hopefully we do actually get a classic. This game's going to be taking place on Sunday, but let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But we are now going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we have some updates on the NHL playoffs. The New York Rangers officially are the first team moving on to the conference finals, and they did so based off of a pretty crazy third period comeback and standout performance, so you won't want to miss the conversation surrounding that. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now going to be moving on from the NBA and talking some NHL playoffs. I know that we're a little sporadic with our NHL coverage here on the show, but wanted to dive into it because of the fact that we have our first team moving on to the conference finals in the New York Rangers. They do so with a comeback win in the third period. It got a little bit scary for the Rangers in this series where they got out to a 3-1 lead. The Hurricanes took Game 5, and it looked like it was going to be headed to a Game 7 as the Canes entered the third period with a 3-1 lead. But it was the Chris Kreider show down the stretch of this game, scoring 3 goals in the third period, all of them at full strength too, no empty netters, so a natural hat trick, and he gives the Rangers the lead that they are able to hold on to throughout the rest of the game. And, you know, this definitely has to hurt. Brindamore talked about it after the game, that it was a super tough way to end off the season for the Hurricanes. Definitely have to feel like this one got away from them. They had a handful of scoring opportunities in both the second and third period to try and add to their lead, but weren't able to do so. Again, enter Chris Kreider, where he was tremendous, both in the 5-on-5 game, but he got one on a power play as well. And then it was Gaudreau putting a nice little good measure goal in as well on the empty netter, and the Rangers are advancing. Definitely New York is feeling itself right now. You have the Knicks in the NBA, and the run that they are putting together seems like they could be on the cusp of making the conference finals as well. They have their Game 6 matchup tonight. And for the Rangers, they are on the hunt where, you know, the Knicks has been this little bit of an underdog story, and, you know, late draft guys that have come together and formed this really good team unit. The Rangers have been a tremendous team all season long. Not that the Knicks haven't been, but of course the President's Cup winners in the NHL this season, trying to become the first team since the 2013 Blackhawks to win the Stanley Cup in the same season they win the President's Trophy. So definitely a lot to be excited about there if you are a Rangers fan. So they get a couple extra days off as things currently stand. They are awaiting the final results of the Panthers and Bruins series, which is taking place. It is a Game 6 matchup tonight. Bruins were down 3-1. They were able to take Game 5 thanks to some first period dominance that they were really able to sort of carry on with. The Panthers did end up scoring to tie in this game, and then maybe a little bit of a controversial goal for the Bruins in the second period where Charlie McAvoy was able to score. There was a conversation about a potential goaltender interference. I thought it was clean. I thought that there was a little bit of contact up front, but it was the Panthers player who knocked the Bobrovsky's stick out of his hand, and ultimately the Bruins were able to hang on in that game, despite making it maybe a little bit difficult late in that third period. But for the Bruins, they at least get to come back home tonight for Game 6. As things currently stand, Brad Marchand, the captain of the Bruins, he is being listed as a game-time decision. Feels like he is probably doubtful. He took that hard hit from Sam Bennett earlier in the series, so I don't think that he's going to be able to return. Would be obviously tremendous for the Bruins if he could, but honestly, I think that in general here, the Bruins are just kind of hanging on for dear life in this series, where they definitely at home have a good shot, but I do sort of have a hard time believing that they're going to be able to pull off the series comeback. The Panthers have now outshot the Bruins 175-107 through the first 5 games of this series, outshot them in every single game. Last game was the closest the Bruins came to outshooting the Panthers, where the discrepancy was just 29-28, but in general, the Bruins have been getting out to really slow starts offensively, a lot of costly turnovers, some misplays on the back half of the defense to allow a lot of breakaways, opportunities for other teams. This is dating back to the Toronto series as well, which, speaking of, the Bruins have been outshot in 10 of their 12 postseason games so far, including that 7-game series against the Maple Leafs. So I think that, again, Bruins, when I say hanging on for dear life, they are really doing so off of Jeremy Swayman, who I think has been tremendous for the Bruins so far in this postseason. I was a little bit surprised, honestly, that they stuck with him as long as they did. There was a big debate in terms of should they stick with the goalie tandem. Linus Ullmark was the Vezina Cup winner in 2023, and I thought that maybe they were going to go sort of back and forth. He last played in Game 2 of that Toronto series, and it has been Swayman since. Now, I don't disagree with it by any means. I was just sort of surprised that they didn't try and shake things up a little bit. I specifically thought that possibly after Game 3 of this series, where Swayman was probably the shakiest that he's looked up to this point, that the Bruins would maybe go with Ullmark. But again, either way, I think that this has been more so about the defense not helping out Swayman, the offense not getting enough production, and I just don't know if we can really see them just turn it around like that. Again, have the home ice to at least sort of maybe ignite the crowd and sort of build up some momentum. But I just think that on the front line, they are outmatched from Florida, and I expect this to probably end tonight. Now, maybe it goes 2-7, in which case the Game 7 matchup would be this weekend, I believe, on Sunday. So we'll see about that. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But again, I think that this is probably the Bruins just hanging on as long as they possibly can, and Swayman doing whatever he can to take them to the promised land, but I don't think it's going to be enough. In the Western Conference, though, we also saw the Canucks win in a late-game thriller against the Oilers. JT Miller scored the game-winning goal with 33 seconds left in the game, and against all odds, the Canucks have taken a 3-2 series lead. Headed into this conference semifinals round, the Canucks had the longest odds to win the Stanley Cup, in large part because despite having a better statistical regular season than the Oilers, they were headed up against a team that has tons of top-end talent, and they have done a really good job to end up sticking through with this. It seemed like last night could have been the turning point, but now the Canucks are going to have 2 opportunities to eliminate the Oilers. And from the Edmonton side of this, we've seen they have been very reliant on their power play opportunities in both this series and the playoffs as a whole. That's where we've seen Leon Draisaitl do a ton of his damage. But last night, we saw the Canucks were flawless on the penalty kill. The Oilers were 0 for 5 on opportunities. It seemed like just 45 or just 15 seconds into the game, unless it was 45. I'm sort of blanking. In the first minute, regardless, a pretty bad penalty from the Canucks getting a goaltender interference call. And it seemed like, again, that may have been a turning point, but they rallied back. The Oilers did score shortly after that, but the Canucks didn't get down, and they end up pulling away with this game. And it's been really impressive to see some unlikely heroes stepping up. Arturs Silovs has been a little bit of a revelation for the Canucks, that they've been able to stick with him through this run, considering the fact that he played in just 4 regular season games this season. He's, of course, a rookie goaltender too. I wouldn't say quite the same energy because of the fact that Binnington played the whole second half of the season, but if you go back to 2021, I believe it was, or it was either that or 2019, blanking off the top of my head, but when the Blues were able to go on their run, and Binnington was absolutely lights out throughout the postseason and really did a lot of the heavy lifting for that team anyways, but Silovs has also been tremendous for them. He had a 42 save performance in Game 3, and last night it was good to see the rest of the Canucks team sort of step up to help him out and limit the opportunities for Edmonton. Again, like I mentioned, especially on the penalty kill. So, as we've seen though, Vancouver has done a really good job winning the 5v5 minutes, not on the penalty kill, not on the power play themselves, but seems like with the depth that they have in opposition to the Oilers, who maybe are a little bit more top heavy on their front lines, but either way, they can't get too far ahead of themselves, but they have to be feeling good, at least knowing that they have 2 more opportunities to close out the Oilers with a little bit of wiggle room. And then the final series here, we have the Avalanche, who staved off elimination on Wednesday night against the Dallas Stars. Stars led 3-1 in the series, and we saw the Avalanche finally take a lead in one of these games where through the first 4 matchups it had been just about all Stars, and the Avalanche won Game 1, but that was coming off of a 3-0 comeback and a game-winning goal in overtime, so they led for 0 seconds officially in that game, and then in the next 3 losses they were never able to hold a lead, but that finally changed, at least in the third period, where it was Casey Mittelstadt who was able to score the goal in that third period and end up giving them the lead. We saw defenseman Cale Makar put in a couple goals in the effort as well to stay alive. We saw the Avalanche's power play finally, again after a really rough stretch over the past few games where they were 0 of 8 on power play situations in their 3 losses. Last night they broke through with that, with I believe a couple goals in their 5-3 win, but definitely a tough one for Dallas to let sort of slip through their hands. Now, at the same time for them, I think that they can't get too down on themselves. They've been tremendous on the road so far in this postseason, 4-1. They've struggled at home, strangely enough, 3-4, but Game 6 is going to be held in Colorado. Let us know what your predictions are for that game. But that is all we have on the NHL playoffs for now. We are going to be taking our next break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into some NFL conversations. I want to talk about the biggest concerns with each of the Super Bowl contenders for the upcoming 2024 season. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're now going to be talking some NFL, have a couple little fun exercises to go through, starting off with the idea of what are the biggest concerns for each of the Super Bowl contenders for the 2024 season. If I don't list a team necessarily in this exercise, it's going to be for the purpose of time. But if in the comments section you have any specific teams you would like me to hit on as well, I can do so. But I have the top 4 or 5 teams in terms of odds, and then a couple other teams that I am also interested in as well. But there's nowhere to start here other than the Kansas City Chiefs, the reigning Super Bowl champions. And one thing that I will note, maybe wouldn't call it an internal struggle by any means. I feel like their roster did actually get better in a lot of ways during this offseason, but having some of these other key quarterbacks in the AFC potentially healthier. Now, we can't necessarily predict injuries like that, but I do feel like last year the Chiefs were able to get away a little bit with the fact that Joe Burrow was injured, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert. You can even throw Deshaun Watson in there. These were all players that were dealing with injuries or fully out down the stretch of last season. Now, like I mentioned, Burrow and the Bengals are obviously the main threat in this situation, but I also am expecting a bounce back year from the Jaguars. The Browns were in the playoffs last year when Watson went out during the middle of the season. It was coming off of his best game of the year, so not exactly sure. Again, we can't predict injuries necessarily, but I do feel like we could definitely see some more competition in terms of other top tier quarterbacks in the AFC, at least available to rival the Chiefs. But in terms of their roster themselves and what you could point to in terms of a hole or a flaw, I think that the offensive line is probably the biggest thing with them, where both of their offensive tackles aren't necessarily bright spots for them. They are going to have a new left tackle in all likelihood. Donovan Smith, who was their primary starter last year, he remains a free agent. It doesn't seem like the Chiefs have all that much interest in pursuing him. So as things currently stand, it's going to be either Wanya Morris or Kingsley Suamatia. I always mess up his name. I apologize. Suamatia, who was the offensive tackle from BYU, second round pickup for them, and I did like the draft pick. I think that he can be a good pro, but it also has been sort of speculated that his game might take a little bit of time to be refined and develop before he is able to step into a situation like this. Of course, a lot of pressure blocking for the best player in the NFL in Mahomes. So his blind side could definitely be exposed on the right side. Juwan Taylor isn't necessarily a sure thing in terms of reliability from his perspective. I think Mahomes is probably at a point where he can make the necessary adjustments regardless of who's in front of him and make the most of the situation, but it is something to look to. And then really the biggest loss for them, of course, was L'Jarius Sneed, where they're just going to have to deal with a little bit more youth, you could say, in the secondary. Jalen Watson does have a lot of potential in my eyes. I thought that he's been solid in his limited role, but now as more of a defined cornerback too, assuming he does win the starting job for them, is he going to be able to maintain that next year? For the 49ers, health is always the biggest thing for them, and it's a little bit of a cop-out, but it is true because there are so many key players, specifically when you look at that offensive side of the ball, that have dealt with injury issues, and that's obviously not even including Dre Greenlaw, who I don't think should be an issue long-term in terms of is he going to be available. That was a freak injury that took place in the Super Bowl, but that torn Achilles is going to keep him out for a lot of the regular season. What's he going to look like when he returns? But on offense, at least, the offensive line, Trent Williams, like I mentioned, with the health issue. Now, 3 consecutive All-Pro first-team selections, and I think that we know when he is on the field, he is a huge difference maker. The team is much worse offensively when he's not playing in the games. Didn't top 17 points, I don't think, in any of the games that he missed last season, but he also hasn't played at least 16 games for the past decade. 2013 was the last time that he played in 16 games. So, it's more about him being available in the playoffs when those come around. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in terms of the regular season. This is probably a little bit of a stretch of a spin zone, but if he were to be out during the regular season, at least in some instances, maybe we could see sort of how Brock Purdy reacts to that. He's going to be up for a contract extension in 2025, but we don't have to dive into all of that right now. But other side of the line, Colton McKivitz, who has been solid for the past couple years during the regular season, struggled more in the postseason, was a part of a little bit of the collapse of the offensive line in overtime that sort of helped lead to the 49ers falling in that game. So Niners, again, another very talented roster, but I do feel like if there were going to be any position group that you have doubts about, it would be the offensive line for me. And speaking of offensive line, I think the Ravens could be thrown into that category as well, as they are going to be losing 3 starters from last season, where they lost Morgan Moses and John Simpson, both to the Jets. Also saw Kevin Zeitler leave in free agency to go to Detroit. So they are definitely going to have to reshuffle a little bit. This is an offense that is very much predicated on the run game. They add Derrick Henry in the backfield, so I don't think it should be an issue necessarily, but is definitely going to be a little bit of a different look. Hopefully they can get a healthy version of Ronnie Stanley, who has been a huge piece for them since they drafted him. I believe it was in 2016 when they selected him with a top 6 pick. But ultimately here, it's going to be some new faces for the Baltimore offensive line, where it seems like Roger Rosengarten, the rookie that they drafted in the second round this year out of Washington, he's probably going to be a day one starter for them. Going to have to replace both of their starting guards as well. So we will see how it all works out for them. I think that, I just feel like this is going to be a situation where it's at least something to look at. Again, big part of their identity is running the ball, but in the passing game as well, you do lose a little bit of the depth with Odell Beckham Jr. walking in free agency, and not that he was a game wrecker necessarily for them, but their wide receiver room is just pretty mediocre. Now, you can probably expect Zay Flowers to take another step forward this year and continue to prove that he is a number 1 threat, but behind him, it's Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, who, granted, as a Patriots fan, I understand that I have some sort of bias there, but Aguilar I just do not believe in as a top 3 wide receiver. Should be interesting to see whether or not Tez Walker can make any type of a splash. He was very exciting when he played at UNC. Obviously, had to deal with the NCAA that sort of derailed his final season in college. Now, the Ravens have tight ends at least to lean on as well, so I'm sure they'll be fine, but those would be the concerning spots for me with them. We also have the Detroit Lions, who are next up, at least in terms of odds to win the Super Bowl. I'd say the biggest thing with them is the inexperience in the secondary. Now, I talked about how I loved the pickups in the draft of Terrion Arnold and Ines Rakestraw Jr. to sort of liven up that secondary. They're just going to be under a lot of pressure, and I do like their front 7 now, but it has been that back end of the secondary, or of the defense, I should say, in the secondary that has been the biggest concern. That definitely showed up during the NFC Championship game as the 49ers put together their comeback win in this instance. Now, Carlton Davis was also a big pickup for them from Tampa Bay. I liked that move for them as well. It's just a defense with a lot of youth in that secondary. You also look at the safety positions. Brian Branch, who showed a lot of promise, as well as Ife Melifonwu. So a talented defense, but again, that has been their number one concern, it feels like, over the past couple of years, sort of kicked up at the end of last season, and hopefully they can sort of maintain strong here. They have the pure talent to do so, but it's going to be interesting to see. We'll go a little bit rapid fire through these last few teams as we're running out of time, but the Buffalo Bills, I would say that it's definitely not having a number one wide receiver. I think that Josh Allen is good enough that he can overcome it, but we have seen instances at least that this Bills offense can maybe get a little stagnant, and I think that this could potentially help Josh Allen sort of become better at, more evenly distributing the football over the field. I thought that's when he played his best football, is when he wasn't looking to just single out Stephon Diggs and maybe work through progressions better. We'll see what Keon Coleman is. It's not like he's an elite route runner, but he is a big physical wide receiver, so we'll see with him. Khalil Shakir was a late season development for them as well. You can also point to some of the losses in their secondary, but I think that there were real concerns with some of the guys they let go of anyways. I don't think the Bills' fall off is going to be quite as dramatic as a lot of other people do. But the Cincinnati Bengals, kind of unfair, but the Joe Burrow health question, and I've said before, I don't necessarily believe that Joe Burrow has an injury problem, but it is definitely a conversation, and sort of tied into that is, are they going to have the run game to sort of help supplement him, because he has a lot on his plate as things currently stand. Teams know that he is obviously the heart of the offense. The Bengals decide to trade Joe Mixon, bring in Zach Moss, who I like Zach Moss, but is he going to be somebody who can be a definitive running back one? And they still have a little bit of depth as well at that running back position, where Chase Brown showed some flashes for them as well. I actually kind of liked Chris Evans as well when he played. Maybe it was just because of the name, but I think that the Bengals are definitely going to need to be able to run the game, which is how I feel about the run the ball, which is how I feel about the Dallas Cowboys as well. And I think that that's their biggest issue, is it's going to be a lot of Dak Prescott, which I think he's capable of during the regular season in a lot of these instances. But the running back position is definitely rough for them. They bring back in Zeke, but I don't know if he's a running back one anymore. Cheap contract at least. They're actually paying more for his old deal for him this season than the new deal that he signed this offseason. But I think that, out behind him, it's Rico Dowell, it's Deuce Vaughn. Just going to be a lot of Dak Prescott, which I do like Dak, I feel like, more than the average NFL fan, but definitely not a super convincing path to victory in my eyes. But let me know what you think. We're now going to be taking our next break of the show. When we come back on the other side, want to look ahead a little bit to the NFL rookie quarterbacks and project when they may make their first career start. So stick with us and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into the next segment here, where I want to, now that we have the official NFL schedules out, I want to talk about when we could see each of the rookie quarterbacks make their first career start. So we're just going to go down the list here in terms of the first round guys and where we could see them end up. Starting with Caleb Williams, the number one overall pick. This is a little bit of a no-brainer. Matt Eberflus has already told reporters that he is the starter, wasted no time in doing so, and sometimes I do typically prefer the competition headed into training camp, but at the same time, the Bears have full faith in Caleb Williams. They moved on from Justin Fields, who is somebody that there were a lot of Bears fans that believed in, and you want to sort of reinstill the belief in the fan base. So they, again, got right to business saying that Caleb Williams is the starter. So he's going to be the week 1 guy for them when they face the Tennessee Titans at home. Super excited to see what he is able to put out this season. But number 2 overall pick, Jaden Daniels. He didn't get quite as much public support from his new head coach when asked about who the week 1 starter is going to be. Dan Quinn, that is, said that Jaden is going to have to earn it, competing in training camp. Now, thing is, I don't think that his level of competition is all too high necessarily, where the quarterback room behind him consists of Marcus Mariota, Jeff Driscoll, and Sam Hartman. So, Daniels is an older player coming into his rookie season. He is 24 years old, I believe, headed into it. So I expect him to be the week 1 starter. I feel like something would have to go really wrong in order for that to be thrown off necessarily. You could possibly make the case that it would be worth waiting until the Commanders are able to play the Giants, which is their week 2 matchup, but I think it's going to be week 1 against the Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. So let me know if you agree or disagree. Next up, we have Drake May for the New England Patriots, and this is where I do think that the conversation gets a little bit more difficult, where I don't believe he is going to be the week 1 starter. I think that Jacoby Brissett is a very capable quarterback, sort of a prototypical bridge guy. And from what we've seen in camp so far, Gerard Mayo says that he still has things to work on, which I believe we sort of knew coming into the draft that it was going to be, I wouldn't quite say a project, but he wasn't going to be a star from day 1. And especially after watching the way that this Patriots organization really fumbled in terms of the development of Mac Jones, I think they're going to be patient. Not to mention the fact that the weapons around the quarterback position still aren't very good. Lots of questions with the offensive line and wide receiver talent. So they brought in Brissett on this 1-year deal. I think that he is going to be the guy for them when they at least start out the season. I also believe that the Patriots have a better defense than people give them credit for, so they could conceivably at least be competitive or at least decent to begin the year and sort of establish this new culture under Gerard Mayo, not have it be the roof is on fire from day 1. And also, the Patriots' schedule is pretty difficult for the most part. It was 8th in terms of strength of schedule, according to win percentages combined from last season, and they have a late bye week 14, so it's not like there's that easy transition necessarily early in the year to work them in. Their season starts out at Cincinnati versus Seattle at home, at New York to face the Jets, at San Francisco, versus Miami at home, and versus Houston at home to start off the season. All of those teams probably in playoff picture, so I don't know if any of them are necessarily, perfect landing spots for Drake May to make his debut. After that, they're going to be in London to face the Jaguars, and I think that is probably when we start to see the timetable of when May is going to play for them. When they come back to America, they are at home against the Jets in week 7, I believe that is, which could definitely be a spot for him. But I also feel like the Jets have a talented defense, divisional game, so could be a tough test. But I feel like it is probably going to be a little bit later than that. Some potential spots for him are week 9 at Tennessee. Not a super high level defense. I think they have a good defensive line, some talent in the second level, so maybe that's not the most ideal situation on the road. Then they are playing the Bears in Chicago week 10. So my guess is ultimately week 11 at home against the LA Rams. A young defense that is losing their coordinator from last season gives him a 3-game sample size headed into their bye week, and then they get to close out with the final 4 games of the season. Now, maybe I'm going a little bit late in this prediction. Again, it's all sort of a guess, but let me know in the comments section what you think about when Drake May could potentially see his first start. Michael Penix Jr., the 8th overall pick, maybe in 2 years. I mean, we know that as long as Kirk Cousins is healthy, he is going to be the starter for the foreseeable future. I've talked about this before. I think it's going to be slightly interesting to see how Atlanta fans sort of buy into Kirk Cousins, because if he's struggling and they know that after having no real ties to Cousins, they just spent the 8th overall pick on a quarterback, there might be some rumblings of fans wanting to see it there. But Falcons are in a bad division. I think that he's still a good enough quarterback that he's going to have the job for the first couple years, and we're not going to see Penix for some time. We had J.J. McCarthy with the Vikings. He's going to be in competition with Sam Darnold coming into the season, and I do believe that there is a very good chance he could beat him out. I'm not necessarily a Sam Darnold guy. I don't know how many Sam Darnold guys there are, but in terms of, Darnold could be a competent bridge quarterback for them, and I think that you could absolutely make the case McCarthy is on the younger end, that you want to work him into the season a little bit. They, unlike the Patriots, have an early bye week, so they could potentially sort of work him in after that. Their week 1 matchup is against the Giants, a team that could definitely be a solid debut to face up against in your first game, but I think that it's going to be after their week 6 bye. They also play in London in week 5 right before that, so not sure if you're going to want McCarthy necessarily having to go to play in London prior, like in his first couple starts. So I think it's going to be week 7 against the Lions. I think the Vikings can be competitive, and Kevin O'Connell will do a good job of making the most of the offensive weapons that they have, but I don't anticipate this being a playoff season for the Vikings, so probably the most amount of experience that J.J. McCarthy can get is for the best. But I think that if it's not week 7, week 9 at home against the Colts would probably be the other landing spot. I don't think he lasts past then without playing, but again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. And then final first round pick here, we have Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. I think it's going to have to be a week 1 start, because it already seemed like it was a little bit of a desperation pick at number 12, because they didn't want to head into next season with either Zach Wilson or Jarrett Stidham as their starting quarterbacks. I think that Stidham is actually all right for Denver, but I think that Sean Payton is going to want to sort of make a statement. All of the rumors that we heard in the offseason about what he feels about Nix is similar to how he felt about Patrick Mahomes when he was coming into the draft in 2017, which is all probably BS anyways. But I think that Sean Payton, after a pretty rocky start to his return to coaching, I think he's going to want to make a statement and try and make something of this Bo Nix experiment. So I think it's going to be a week 1 start for him, but I think that anything can really go in Denver. It's not like any one of these options are super compelling, but I think it'll be Nix. But let me know what your thoughts are, what your predictions are in the comment section. We're going to be taking our final break here, and when we come back on the other end, we're going to fire through some baseball headlines. So stick with us, and we will be right back. welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day. I want to talk a little MLB. Haven't done so in a minute, so just talking about the biggest headlines in sports as we are recording this on Friday afternoon. We do have the second career game for Paul Skeens in the big leagues, and off to a pretty nice start where he struck out the entire side of Chicago. So after we wrap up here, of course, definitely tune into that game because should be really interesting to continue to monitor what Skeens does at the professional level. But on the note of another top prospect, we have Elly De La Cruz, who last night went 4-4 from the box, had 4 steals on every single one of those hits, and was able to score 3 runs himself. He's up to 30 stolen bases on the year. He's on pace for something along the lines of 100 to 110. So he just continues to develop. And, last year we saw him go in a little bit of a, I don't know what you want to call it, maybe a slump. It wasn't like quite to drastic extent necessarily with De La Cruz, but this Reds team has tons of young potential, and we're seeing De La Cruz be able to put up big stats, hitting .277, has 9 home runs as well. So that combination of being able to hit, make contact, the power, and the speed that he has is really tremendous. Again, this team that I think is really coming along and maybe a little bit more disappointing than they were hoping for. I think in large part because of the fact that for all of the young talent that they have, doesn't seem like the pitching staff necessarily has the same level of juice, but wanted to highlight De La Cruz for the job that he's been doing. But there was also a couple pitcher stories that have come out in the past couple days. We will start with Ronel Blanco, who is the pitcher for the Houston Astros. He is the only player to throw a no-hitter so far, first quarter of the season, and he has just been suspended for using an illegal substance in his start against the Oakland Athletics on Tuesday. He's been suspended for 10 games. He is not appealing the suspension, but definitely just another sort of kick here for the Astros, who are maybe turning things around as things currently stand. Not quite as bad of a start, or not bad of a pace right now as what the start was, but they're sitting at 19-25, and I don't know how much more their pitching staff can really deal with these variety of different issues because of the fact that we've seen their bullpen really struggle to be consistent for them. They're still waiting on some injuries in the staff as well, and it's just very much concerning because Blanco has been just about their best starting pitcher to begin this season, and the fact that they're now going to be without him for the next 10 games is just, again, another low blow for this Houston staff as they are trying to overcome the situation surrounding them, but definitely not ideal here for the Astros. But also some pitching news. We have Emmett Sheehan, the starting pitcher for the LA Dodgers, who began this season on the IL. He is now officially ruled out for the remainder of the year because he is getting Tommy John surgery. He was projected to be the number 5 starter for the Dodgers coming into this year. He pitched his rookie season last year, and he showed some promise, especially down the stretch of the season, but he was dealing with some forearm inflammation and shoulder soreness coming into this year, but now they are officially ruling him out for the rest of the year as he's going to need the Tommy John surgery. So super unfortunate. Again, this injury bug that is taking place with pitchers strikes again. Now, the Dodgers, despite the fact that they are dealing with a variety of different pitching injuries, they've been able to stay afloat. Bobby Miller, their promising young pitcher, he spent the past month on the injured list dealing with a shoulder soreness injury. He is expected back at least. He threw a couple simulated innings the other day on Wednesday, so should expect to see him back soon. Clayton Kershaw, for whatever he still can give the Dodgers. He's supposed to be some sort of a mid-season addition for them by the time that he comes back. Walker Buehler, after missing 22 months of baseball, he's at least finally back for the Dodgers. Now, he's been struggling early on for them. 7 1/3 innings pitched, 11 hits, 2 walks, and 6 earned runs through his first 2 starts. So these are all players that they should hopefully have back and see improve, but Sheehan adds to this list of he, Dustin May, and Tony Gonsolin, all supposed to be top 5 guys in their rotation, are out for the rest of the year. But the offense has been massive for the Dodgers in this instance, and that's helping them lead to a top 5 record so far this season. And again, despite dealing with all these injuries, the pitchers too have been able to sort of hang in there and get the job done. It's Tyler Glasnow, of course, sort of leading the way for them, as well as the other 2 guys that they have added in the offseason, and Yamamoto, and a pretty solid performance so far from Gavin Stone, who has slid into that 5th spot for the Dodgers rotation with the absence of Sheehan, and he's been able to hold up so far in his performances so far this year. So definitely good to see from that perspective. But 22 quality starts out of the starting group here. They have the 4th lowest collective ERA in the major leagues as well. And of course, offensively, they have the top 3 killer lineup of Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, and Freddie Freeman to help them carry their the offensive load as well. So Dodgers definitely don't have anything massive to worry about, but it is, of course, unfortunate that they just keep seeming to, even going back to last season, be dealing with these various situations regarding their pitchers that have definitely put a damper on the rotation. And yet here they are sort of cruising so far in the West, the NL West, I should say, are probably going to continue on that pace. But let me know if you have any thoughts on the Dodgers. But on that note, again, had to sort of go a little bit more rapid fire because we are out of time for the day. So thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We are live every 2 to 3 p.m. on weekdays, so we will be back on Monday. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. But have a great weekend and take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.